Hello everybody, I am Joshua Chanin. This is a presentation of the Battle of Gettysburg. It's a brief overview. We will discuss more about the battle in class, and you may also read about this topic in your textbook. Today we're going to be learning about a significant battle in the American Civil War, the Battle of Gettysburg. This portion of the Civil War, in the summer of 1863, has been named by many scholars as the turning point of the bloodiest war in the history of the United States. After his strategic victory at Chancellorsville in May 1863, Confederate General Robert E. Lee planned his second invasion into Northern Territory. His aim was to march his 72,000 troops up north and then sweep around and head south, capturing the federal capital, Washington, D.C. In June, his troops began their long march northwards, silently pursuing the goal without the Union Army noticing them. However, Lee's secret plans foiled, and soon enough the Army of the Potomac was on its heels, under the direction of General George Meade. Meade had over 110,000 troops at his command. On the first day of the Gettysburg campaign, July 1st, the Union cavalry forces, under Chief of Cavalry Officer John Burford, got involved in a skirmish outside the small, quiet town of Gettysburg at the Maryland-Pennsylvania state border, with two regiments of the Confederate Army under Lieutenant General A.P. Hill. At this point in time, both armies were slowly arriving on the battlefield. That afternoon, the Confederates had the upper hand, and the Union forces retreated through the town and up on the heights. In the evening, the fighting stopped, and both sides prepared for the next day. On the 2nd of July, the second day, the Confederate forces, under Lieutenant General James Longstreet, attacked the left and right flanks of the Union lines on the heights. As you can see from this picture on your slide, the Union forces were shaped in a fishhook. Lee told his officers that they were to strike at the flanks. As the day went on, the Confederates had no luck and their attacks were repulsed. General Meade's forces had the high ground and a clear tactical advantage. One Union officer, which I assume most of you know by name, Joshua Chamberlain, showed great courage on this day as his men from the state of Maine defended their grounds on Little Round Top. At the end of the day, Lee's forces were repulsed and the Union flanks were not broken. This is a quote by Joshua Chamberlain explaining the bravery and proud valor of the soldiers in the battle. Also, I would definitely recommend checking out the 1993 movie Gettysburg, based off the Killer Angels book, and depicts the battle in its entirety. It stars Jeff Daniels as Chamberlain. This painting is an inspiration from the movie. The third day, July 3rd, was General Lee's last chance to break the Union lines. His army was running out of supplies, and the men's morale was slowly depleting each day. Many had already been wounded and killed in the campaign. This was going to be Lee's last stand. The Confederate general planned that his forces would strike the center of the Union lines. The main objective was to strike at the low point in the Union lines on Cemetery Ridge. This would be known thereafter as the high water mark of the Confederacy, the furthest northern position the Confederate Army pushed before they were repelled back. Longstreet, Lee's closest advisor, warned him against the attack, repeatedly stating that the assault would fail. However, Lee held his ground. Lee named Major General George Pickett to lead the frontal assault. After much planning, in the morning's war council, Lee's army unleashed their last efforts. 160 Confederate cannon opened fire at 1 in the afternoon. For 2 hours, both sides exchanged shots. This would be the largest cannon bombardment of the war. Lee used his cannon to try and knock out enemy outposts and weaken the Union lines. However, the cannon fire did not make much difference. At 3 in the afternoon, 12,500 Confederate men emerged from the forest and got into formation. There were 9 brigades of men stretched out over a mile front. The Confederate soldiers began to march towards their enemy, perfectly in line, side by side, slowly but steadily, over 3/4 of a mile of foreign land. Union artillery fire rained down upon the Confederate forces, crushing many men. Many Confederates died along the way, and as they were marching in open land with little protection, the enemy was exposed. There were also fences in the way for most of the Confederate regiments, slowing their tracks and leaving them open to Union cannon fire. But no matter how big the dents were in the Confederate lines, the Southern soldiers seemed to push on. With a couple of 100 yards to the Union lines at Cemetery Ridge, the Confederates picked up the pace and finally charged at their enemies. In close range, they were subject to the gunfire of Union troops, who were protected by stone walls. The Union troops at the ridge repelled many enemy soldiers, slowing their advance. A Confederate brigade under Lewis Armistead, which you can see in this painting, was able to pierce the Union lines and rebels and engaged the Yankees in hand-to-hand combat. However, the Southerners were pushed back by Union reinforcements. After less than 3 hours of battle, the fields of Gettysburg were soaked with blood. The Confederates had lost 60% of their men from the charge. The Union lines had been reinforced, and the Confederates had to stumble back. Lee's plan had failed. There is one famous moment where Lee asked the teary-eyed Pickett where his division was. Pickett sadly replied, "General Lee, I have no division." The Confederate plan to overthrow the Union army at Gettysburg had failed. Over 53,000 men were killed, wounded or missing after the Gettysburg campaign, marking the event as the bloodiest battle of the Civil War. The next day, July 4th, ironically, the 87th anniversary of American independence, General Lee and his army started their long retreat home. This would be the last major offensive campaign for Lee. The once so-called invincible general would be on the defensive for the remainder of the war. This is a quote from General George Pickett. The Battle of Gettysburg and Pickett's charge clearly became the turning points of the Civil War. Not only did the morale and victorious spirit of the Army of Northern Virginia were destroyed, this battle was also the event that the Union Army needed to boost their own war morale. The tide of the war had changed. The Union soldiers now realized that Lee was not invincible and could be broken. General Meade was also the first general in the Union Army to achieve a major victory. Although the bitter fighting had died around the town of Gettysburg, the soldiers on both sides would endure 2 more bloody years before General Lee's surrender in 1865.